My family tried to destroy me, but I turned it around and achieved my freedom and real success. I sat in the bathroom, locked in, cell phone in hand, tears streaming down my face as my heart nearly burst. That Thanksgiving night, which should have been just another uncomfortable family dinner, had become a silent battlefield filled with sidelong glances and implicit accusations. Every gesture from my parents, every smile or tear from my sister Marina, was a painful reminder that I had always been the forgotten daughter, the invisible one, the one whose achievements didn't matter. My chest ached, my head was pounding, and the feeling of abandonment was so real, it felt like I could touch it. I remembered every birthday my parents ignored my victories. Every night I felt like I had no place in the world, and I felt a mixture of anger, sadness, and fear. Everything seemed to conspire to make me feel worthless, that my existence was lesser. But there was a small spark inside me, a need to exist somehow, to prove that I could be more than the silence that surrounded me. Each breath felt heavy, each tear hotter than the last, and I realized that somehow I had to react, even if I didn't know how yet. My name is Helena, I'm 34 years old, and for a long time I believed there was something wrong with me. When Marina was born prematurely, everything in my family changed. My mother and father began to treat her like a crystal, celebrating every small gesture as an extraordinary achievement, while I, at just 8 years old, felt increasingly invisible. I tried to compete for attention, to show that I also deserved praise, but any victory of mine was ignored or forgotten in seconds. I grew up believing that my presence could be a hindrance, that loving my sister meant disappearing, that every smile I made was a risk to the world my parents built around her. Every birthday, every academic achievement, every effort I made seemed insignificant, and this feeling of invisibility stayed with me for years. Memories came in waves, and sadness mixed with anger, creating a whirlwind that had followed me since childhood. A silent weight I carried, unsure if I would ever be able to free myself from it. I remember entire nights lying in my room, staring at the ceiling, trying not to cry, while listening to my mother tell stories about caring for my sister or celebrating her small accomplishments. The medals I won in math competitions and Olympiads were forgotten in a drawer without any recognition. I grew up thinking that maybe I was dangerous, maybe I was too much, maybe I didn't deserve attention. I tried to reach out, show off my achievements, recount victories, but it was like talking to a wall. Silence taught me that there was no room for me, that my opinion, my feelings, my emotions didn't matter, that I needed to hide to exist. The feeling of loneliness was overwhelming, and even playing with classmates and friends at school, a part of me always felt out of place, invisible, as if my existence were but a shadow beside the attention lavished on my sister. At 15, I decided I could no longer depend on my family to feel like I existed. I started working early, seeking any form of independence that could give me some control over my life. I worked in antique shops and pawn shops, learning about jewelry, antique pieces, and the stories hidden in every detail. It was a silent world, but it was mine, something no one could take away. Nights when I came home from work, I studied late into the night, took online courses, and saved every penny carefully. It was a silent but constant effort that made me feel alive and useful, even if no one in my family recognized it. With each step, I realized that my life needed to be built by myself, without depending on approval or praise. Every penny saved, every course taken, every piece of knowledge acquired was a silent victory against the invisibility that had surrounded me since childhood. I learned to value myself silently, without relying on external recognition, understanding that the greatest validation came from within. The loneliness and feeling of invisibility I felt as a child transformed into strength, motivation, and discipline. I knew that if I wanted to survive and be happy, I had to fight for myself, because no one else would do it for me. Every tear, every moment of doubt, every sleepless night was a building block in the construction of the woman I would become. At 28, after years of study, silent work, and absolute dedication, I achieved a dream, opening my own antiques and rare jewelry store. I remember the day I signed the contract, sitting in my car, my heart racing and my hands trembling, tears streaming shamelessly. No one in my family would celebrate with me. I knew it. The feeling of loneliness was intense, but there was also a quiet pride. Finally, I was building something of my own, something no one could take away. Every piece in the store had a story, and every detail was a reflection of the effort I had put in throughout my life, the time I had invested in learning, saving, and believing I could exist outside the shadow of my family. The store represented more than money or success. It was my proof that I could do it, that I had value, that my life didn't need to depend on the attention of those who had never valued me. At that moment, I felt a mixture of joy, anxiety, and fear. Fear of failure, of something going wrong, but also a newfound confidence that my persistence was finally bearing fruit. 5 years later, a Japanese customer came into the store and purchased a rare batch of diamonds I had painstakingly acquired. In a single transaction, my financial life completely changed, and I became a millionaire. I felt a whirlwind of emotions: disbelief, joy, fear, and also a sense of quiet power I had never experienced before. For the first time, I realized that all the pain, all the struggle, all the isolation I had faced since childhood was transforming into something concrete, tangible. But along with this victory came the weight of expectation from my family, who had never cared about me but now saw an opportunity to take advantage. The feeling was strange. I was in control, but I still felt the need to justify my choices to those who had always ignored me. Every penny in that moment symbolized freedom, independence, but also the responsibility to protect everything I had built alone. Thanksgiving dinner, the question came casually, yet charged with anticipation. "Where did your new car come from?" I answered without much thought, and immediately felt the mood shift. The heavy silence was followed by accusations. My mother and father began demanding that I help my sister, who deserved better. My chest heaved, my breath short, my hands sweating, and anger bubbling inside. I, the forgotten daughter, the invisible one, was now being pressured to give up something that had cost me so much effort. For the first time in my life, I realized I needed to set boundaries, that I could no longer allow myself to be emotionally exploited by someone who had never valued my existence. The moment was terrifying, but also liberating. Finally, I knew I could make decisions about my own life. I trembled as I heard my parents call me selfish and my sister complain, crying and claiming it was unfair. The feeling of indignation was intense, but also the certainty that I couldn't give in. For the first time, I felt like my entire life was balancing on the edge of a choice: give in to the family that ignored me, or finally put myself first. My face burned, my heart pounded, but I managed to speak firmly. I wouldn't give a single cent. All of this was the fruit of my effort, study, and dedication. I left dinner with shaky legs, my chest heavy, but with a sense of freedom I had never felt before. The decision to set limits brought fear and guilt, but also an unprecedented strength that began to transform me. In the following days, the mix of feelings was intense: anger, sadness, guilt, and relief. Every memory of that dinner tightened my chest, but I began to realize that saying no didn't make me less human. It simply meant protecting my life and my story. I realized that all the effort I'd put in as a child, every night studying alone, every penny I saved, had real value. I began planning to expand my business, investing in knowledge, marketing, and new projects. Every step, every decision, even with the fear of making mistakes, made me feel alive and empowered. For the first time, I was the protagonist of my life, and that feeling was indescribable, because it showed me that it was possible to succeed even when no one believed in you. In the days that followed, I realized I needed to transform pain into strength. Every childhood memory, every time I felt invisible or ignored, came with intensity, tightening my chest and quickening my breathing. But at the same time, I began to see that every tear shed, every sleepless night studying alone, every silent work had shaped me for this moment. I understood that true strength comes from facing one's own story, from accepting that pain exists, but that it cannot define one's destiny. It was a slow, painful, but liberating process. I began writing about my feelings, recording my memories, venting to trusted friends and therapy. Each written word helped me process the anger, sadness, and feelings of abandonment. I felt each emotion physically: the tension in my shoulders, the tightness in my stomach, the dry throat, but each sensation also reminded me that I was alive, that I had the capacity to overcome. I discovered that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to continue despite it. I decided to invest even more in growing my business and personal development. I started taking management, marketing, and networking courses, things I'd previously neglected out of fear or lack of opportunity. Each lesson became a tool to strengthen me emotionally and financially. The fear of failure was still present, but now it was fuel, not an obstacle. Every mistake I made taught me something new. Every achievement gave me more confidence. Little by little, I realized that my life no longer needed to revolve around family approval. I could create my own validation. The intense nights of work, the satisfied customers, the store's growth, all became symbols of my independence. The feeling of finally being able to control my destiny was indescribable and reminded me that every silent effort over the years had been worth it. At the same time, I began working on my self-esteem and dealing with my pent-up anger. Therapy, writing, and honest outpourings were essential. Each painful childhood memory was accompanied by confusing thoughts and strong emotions, but I learned to name each feeling and accept it. I recognized that I wasn't to blame for favoritism toward my sister and that my needs were always legitimate. This understanding gave me the clarity to make important decisions without being driven by guilt or fear. I felt, for the first time, that my worth didn't depend on the recognition of others, but on the respect I had for myself. Each step in this process was accompanied by a physical sense of relief. The tightness in my chest lessened, my breathing became lighter, and the tension in my shoulders began to relax. It was as if I was finally releasing the weight I'd carried since childhood. One of my greatest lessons was differentiating generosity from exploitation. I realized I could help people who truly needed it, but I couldn't let myself be used by those who always ignored me. Every time I felt guilty about saying no to my family, I remembered the effort I put in to earn my place and achieve my success. The feeling of autonomy was incredible. Every penny, every decision, every victory was mine, built with hard work, discipline, and courage. I began to understand that the freedom to choose my path was one of the greatest treasures I could have, far more valuable than any approval I could receive from my parents or sister. Gradually, I realized I didn't need their approval to validate my existence. Every step I took, every investment I made, every decision I made reminded me that I was capable and worthy. The anger I felt transformed into strength, the guilt into awareness, and the sadness into motivation. I felt empowered and alive, every cell in my body vibrating with a sense of achievement. It was the first time I could look back on my life and see my entire journey, knowing that I, alone, had built my story, overcome rejection, and transformed pain into victory. The feeling of freedom was intense, and the relief of finally feeling genuine pride in myself was incomparable. Months later, my life took a turn I never imagined possible. The store grew, new customers arrived daily, and I felt a confidence I had never experienced before. Each professional and financial achievement became a constant reminder that my persistence had paid off. I no longer needed my family's approval, as I was proving to myself, day after day, that I could exist and succeed on my own merits. Every decision I made was an affirmation of my autonomy, and the feeling of inner power this brought was indescribable. Even with this independence, the memory of Thanksgiving dinner still lingered in my mind. I knew my parents expected me to give in, and that my sister would benefit from something she hadn't earned. Every call, every message from them provoked a mixture of anger, anxiety, and sadness. My heart raced, my breath became shallow, and my hands trembled. But for the first time, I was able to look at the situation clearly and understand that protecting my achievement and my boundaries was an act of self-love, not selfishness. To organize my thoughts, I wrote a letter to my parents, expressing my vision, childhood memories, and repressed feelings. Each word was filled with emotion, pain, and sincerity, revealing the reality of who I was and who I had become. I expressed that loving my sister didn't mean sacrificing my life, and that my success was the result of personal effort. The act of writing brought me immediate relief, as if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. For the first time, I felt like I was taking control of my narrative, without fear of judgment or criticism. As I sent the letter, I felt a mixture of anxiety and freedom. They might react with anger, contempt, or incomprehension, but that didn't change my resolve to maintain my boundaries. For weeks, I focused on my life, the growth of my business, and the experiences that brought me joy. Money, which had previously generated tension and pressure, became a symbol of my freedom, independence, and ability to decide my own destiny. The feeling of control over my life had never been so intense and liberating. It was during this period that I realized something essential. I didn't need my family's approval to validate my existence. I learned to value my achievements, respect my limits, and fully trust my inner strength. Every step, every investment, every decision I made reminded me that my journey was built with courage, dedication, and self-love. I discovered that true victory lies not in the recognition of others, but in the ability to stand firm, overcome challenges, and keep moving forward, even in the face of pain, rejection, or lack of support. Today, looking back on my journey, I can see every tear, every sleepless night, every moment I felt invisible, and understand that all of it shaped me. The pain was intense, but it fueled me to become the woman I am today. I still feel pangs of sadness for not having received the support I deserved from my family, but I've learned to transform those memories into motivation. Every victory achieved, every step I take, is proof that it's possible to overcome even when the whole world seems to ignore your existence. My relationship with my family isn't perfect, and I may never receive all the recognition I desire, but that doesn't matter anymore. I've learned that my worth doesn't depend on their approval, but on the respect I have for myself. I've started celebrating my achievements, even small ones, and recognizing my efforts. Every challenge overcome, every decision made, has strengthened me and made me realize that life is mine, and that no one can define my happiness or success. What kept me going was the certainty that if I didn't believe in myself, no one else would. All the favoritism, rejection, and loneliness of my childhood taught me to fight, study, and invest in myself. I transformed every hardship into learning and strength. Today, I can look in the mirror and see a resilient, courageous, independent, and, above all, vibrant woman. My story isn't just about pain, but about courage and overcoming. I want anyone who reads my story to know that it's possible to overcome, even when the pain seems unbearable. It's not about ignoring the past, but about using each scar as fuel to build something greater. It's not about revenge, but about self-affirmation. You don't have to destroy yourself to be accepted, nor give in to please. The freedom to choose your path, the courage to say no, and the ability to believe in yourself are the greatest victories anyone can achieve. So, if you feel forgotten, ignored, or undervalued, know that there is a way. It requires courage, tears, nights of doubt, and hard work, but it is possible. I achieved my independence, built my fortune and my happiness without depending on anyone who never valued me. I still deal with bits of pain, but I've learned that true victory is choosing yourself, protecting your story, and celebrating every step you take, knowing you've won, even when no one else has noticed. Life is yours, and the strength to change everything has always been within you.